Before Jesus spoke to the crowds, Mary had already walked through fire. When we picture Mary, what comes to mind? A serene face framed by a blue veil? A gentle mother cradling her child? These images are beautiful, but incomplete, because behind the icon was a warrior. Mary of Nazareth wasn't just a passive vessel in a grand divine plan. She was a teenage girl who made a conscious, terrifying choice to say yes. Yes to a future that would isolate her from her community. Yes to a child whose very existence would put her life at risk. Yes to a calling that would break her heart and transform the world. This video is not just another religious reflection. This is a confrontation with the raw humanity of one of history's most misunderstood women. We'll trace her steps from an obscure Galilean village to the foot of the cross and beyond. We'll see her not as a stained glass figure, but as a woman who carried the weight of prophecy with trembling hands, and who endured agony most of us couldn't even begin to fathom. So who was she really? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning. And no, not just to the birth of Jesus, but to Mary's birth. Likely born in the modest town of Nazareth, she grew up among farmers, stonecutters, and craftsmen. There were no palaces, no luxuries, just the dust of the earth and the traditions of her people. Jewish girls at the time were often promised in marriage before they turned 14. Life moved quickly, with few options and no guarantees. It was in this setting, a quiet, routine life, that everything changed. A messenger appears, not a metaphorical one, a literal divine visitor, the angel Gabriel. He delivers a message that sounds impossible. You will bear a son, not just any son, the Son of the Most High. Pause for a moment. Imagine you're 13. You've never been with a man. You're engaged. And suddenly you're told that you'll be pregnant with God's child. This isn't the kind of news you can post on social media. In her culture, a pregnancy outside of marriage wasn't just frowned upon, it was punishable by death. The usual method? Stoning. And yet, she says yes. There's no bargaining, no demand for reassurance. Just one hauntingly simple response. Let it be done to me according to your word. That was the moment everything shifted. Heaven touched earth. And it did so not through thunder or kings, but through the fragile courage of a teenage girl. But don't let the simplicity of that sentence fool you. That yes was an act of spiritual rebellion. It defied fear. It challenged cultural norms. And it would shape the course of human history. Still, many of us forget what came next. We romanticize the Nativity story with Christmas carols and candlelight. But what about the shame? The sideways glances in her village? The awkward silences at family gatherings? Even her fiancé Joseph, a good man, didn't believe her at first. He planned to leave her quietly, to avoid scandal. Only after a divine dream does he decide to stay. Together, Mary and Joseph choose faith over fear. But it's not a fairy tale. It's the beginning of a road paved with uncertainty, danger, and eventually, heartbreak. Mary's journey wasn't clean or easy. It wasn't sanitized for Sunday school. It was messy, gritty, human, and that's what makes it holy. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into that mess, into the physical, emotional, and spiritual struggle Mary endured. Because the Nativity wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. If you think you already know Mary's story, get ready to see it with new eyes. After the angel's visit and Joseph's change of heart, you might expect the story to calm down. But for Mary, the storm was just beginning. She was now carrying the Messiah, God incarnate, and instead of finding shelter or honor, she found hardship. The first major test? A government order. The Roman Empire, always keen to flex its control, had ordered a census. That meant Mary and Joseph had to travel to Bethlehem, Joseph's ancestral town, to be counted. On paper, this sounds simple, but the reality? A grueling 90-mile journey through rocky terrain and unpredictable weather, most likely on foot or atop a tired donkey, and Mary was nearing full term. Let that sink in. A teenage girl, pregnant with no medical support, making a multi-day trek through hills and deserts, while facing the social shame of an unexplained pregnancy. No inns, no warm welcome, only fatigue, anxiety, and the growing pain of labor. When they finally arrived, the town was crowded. No guest rooms, no relatives stepping in. In desperation, they found shelter, most likely a small cave carved out near a family home where animals were kept. Archaeological research in the region of Judea supports this. Unlike the wooden barns in Christmas plays, ancient homes had stone caves as stables. And it's there, on cold stone and straw, that Jesus was born. Let's pause here. The Son of God, the one whose arrival had been foretold for centuries, enters the world not in a palace, but in poverty. Not greeted by kings, but surrounded by the bleating of goats and sheep. Mary didn't have a nurse. She didn't have her mother holding her hand. What she had was pain, blood, fear, and faith. And then, silence. That holy silence after birth. The crying newborn, wrapped not in luxury but in cloth scraps, placed not in a golden cradle, but in a stone trough used for watering animals. This is how heaven chose to invade earth, through weakness, through flesh. And Mary? She didn't protest. She didn't demand better conditions. Instead, she treasured it all in her heart. Every detail, every sacred breath. But soon after came a prophecy that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Following Jewish custom, Mary and Joseph took the infant Jesus to the temple in Jerusalem. It was a rite of dedication. Every firstborn male was to be presented to the Lord. There they met Simeon. This wasn't a random encounter. Simeon was a devout man who had been promised by the Holy Spirit that he would live to see the Messiah. When he laid eyes on Jesus, he knew. He took the child in his arms, blessed God, and then turned to Mary. This child is destined for the rise and fall of many in Israel, and a sword will pierce your soul also. A sword through her soul. Can you imagine hearing that? Holding your baby boy while being told that someday, somehow, you'll feel pain so deep it will cut through your very essence? Simeon's words weren't metaphor. They were prophecy, and Mary knew it. From that moment on, the birth of Jesus was no longer just a miracle. It became a countdown. A beautiful beginning that pointed toward an unthinkable end. But what's astonishing is how Mary responded. She didn't fall apart. She didn't spiral into fear. She simply held her son and continued walking in faith. This moment is often skipped in sermons, but it matters. It reveals a central truth. To be called by God doesn't mean a life free of pain. Sometimes it means walking headfirst into it. Mary wasn't spared grief. She was chosen to bear it. As Jesus grew, so did the quiet weight she carried. At 12, when he was lost in the temple for 3 days, she got another glimpse of that sword. Her panic, her fear, her heartbreak, and then the baffling reply from her son. "Didn't you know I must be in my Father's house?" It wasn't disrespect, it was destiny speaking. Mary knew then that her child belonged to something far greater than herself. But that didn't make it easier. In this phase of Mary's story, we begin to see a woman who embodies something often misunderstood in modern spirituality: resilient obedience. She didn't just say yes once and coast. She said yes again and again, with every sleepless night, every lonely decision, every confusing moment. She said yes when it was hard, when it hurt, when she didn't understand. And maybe that's where her greatness lies, not in the miracle of giving birth to the Savior, but in the relentless courage to keep going long after the miracle faded into the mundane. Today, many of us seek signs. We want proof. We want comfort. But Mary shows us something better: faith that walks even in the dark. As we move into the next chapter, we'll see Mary not only face that darkness, but walk beside her son as his ministry begins, and watch as the child she once held in her arms begins to hold the weight of the world. Years passed. The little boy in Mary's arms grew into a man, but Jesus didn't rush into public life. He lived quietly in Nazareth for nearly 3 decades. To outsiders, he was just the carpenter's son. But Mary knew, always, that something far greater was coming. And then it began. Strangely, the public ministry of Jesus didn't start in a synagogue or on a mountaintop, but at a wedding. It was a joyous occasion in Cana, filled with laughter, food, and dancing. Mary was there, likely helping with the celebration. And that's when it happened. The wine ran out. In today's world, this might seem like a minor hiccup, but in ancient Jewish culture, it was a huge embarrassment, a symbol of failure. The bridegroom's family would be shamed. Mary noticed, and instead of ignoring it, she turned to Jesus. She didn't beg. She didn't explain. All she said was, "They have no wine." It was more than a comment, it was a nudge. A mother's gentle way of saying, "Son, it's time." Jesus' response is famously cryptic. "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." To modern ears, it can sound harsh, but context matters. In the original language, woman wasn't disrespectful, it was formal, even honorable. And in calling her that, Jesus echoes the story of Eve. Mary was becoming the new Eve, the woman through whom salvation would enter the world. Mary didn't argue. She simply turned to the servants and said, "Do whatever he tells you." Those 5 words changed everything. They weren't just instructions for a moment, they were a roadmap for discipleship. Do whatever he tells you, even when it's strange, even when it's hard, even when it makes no sense. And what followed? Jesus' first public miracle. Water into wine. Not just wine, but the best wine anyone had ever tasted. A quiet miracle, a gentle beginning. But it marked the shift. Jesus' path to the cross had begun. After that moment, Mary faded into the background, not because she was unimportant, but because she understood her role. She wasn't the star, she was the witness. Throughout his ministry, we don't see Mary demanding attention, but she was there, always near, watching as her son healed the blind, embraced the outcasts, walked on water, and forgave the unforgivable. Imagine what that felt like for a mother, to see your child perform miracles, to hear strangers say he speaks like no one ever has, to know that he was doing exactly what he was born to do. And yet, with every miracle, the danger grew. Religious leaders began to whisper. Crowds grew more volatile. Threats mounted. Mary, who once feared stoning for her pregnancy, now feared crucifixion for her son. She had always known he was different, but now she began to realize he was walking toward death, and she couldn't stop it. As a mother, that's unbearable. You want to shield your child, to run ahead and clear the path. But Mary didn't interfere. She stood back, not out of weakness, but out of respect for his mission. That's a form of love we rarely talk about, love that lets go. Mary's journey wasn't just about saying yes to birth, it was about saying yes to letting him fulfill his purpose, even when that meant pain. And through it all, she prayed. We don't get many scenes of Mary during Jesus' travels, but tradition and context tell us enough. She likely lived in quiet support, cooking, listening, encouraging, praying late at night, crying in silence, maybe even sewing his tunic, all while watching rumors swirl around him. Sometimes he was called a prophet, other times a madman, sometimes the Messiah, other times a threat to Rome. Through it all, Mary held steady. In our world, where recognition and visibility are prized, her story is a reminder that the most powerful work often happens in the shadows, that courage isn't always loud, and that true strength is staying when things fall apart. She didn't abandon him. She didn't try to pull him off the stage when the crowds turned hostile. She stayed on the sidelines, faithful, focused, present. And then came the turning point. Jesus entered Jerusalem on a donkey, hailed as king. Mary must have hoped, even for a moment, that maybe the worst wouldn't happen, that maybe this would end with joy. But she knew prophecy too well. She saw the same people who shouted, "Hosanna!" become the ones who screamed, "Crucify him!" days later. As Jesus' final hours approached, the sword Simeon warned about so long ago now hovered above her, ready to fall. And still, she didn't run. In the next section, we'll witness what no mother should ever have to face, Mary at the foot of the cross. And we'll see that even in the depths of pain, her presence was a testimony of a faith that refuses to be crushed. It is the darkest day in history. The sky grows heavy, and so does Mary's heart. She had carried him into the world, and now she would watch the world crush him. There on a dusty hill called Golgotha, Mary stands, helpless, heartbroken, and unflinching. She does not faint. She does not flee. She stays. And that in itself is a miracle. Picture the scene. Crowds jeering, soldiers gambling, the sound of nails being driven through flesh. Amidst this chaos, Mary stands in silence, the sword of Simeon piercing not just her soul, but every part of her being. No mother should have to watch her child die, and certainly not like this. Not stripped, mocked, tortured, and hung up like a criminal. But Mary does, because she understands something deeper, something many of us miss. Love does not run from pain, it leans in. Her son, whom she once wrapped in swaddling cloths, is now wrapped in wounds. The arms that used to cling to her neck are now stretched wide on rough beams of wood. And yet, even in this unspeakable agony, Jesus sees her. In his final moments, bruised, bleeding, and suffocating, he looks down and says, "Woman, behold your son." Then to John, "Behold your mother." It wasn't just a gesture of care, it was a declaration. Mary was not alone. Jesus, with what breath he had left, gave her a new son. And through that act, gave her to all of us as a spiritual mother. That exchange between Jesus and Mary at the foot of the cross is more than personal, it's profoundly symbolic. It tells us that even when all hope seems lost, relationship matters. Love matters. And the maternal strength of Mary, the one who stood, who stayed, who grieved, is something the church would carry forward forever. But don't skip past the pain. Let it sit with you. She wasn't just mourning a loss. She was witnessing the complete collapse of everything she had ever cherished. The silence of God, the failure of justice, the humiliation of her son, and yet she remained. This is a side of Mary that we rarely explore in full depth. She is not only the woman of the yes or the serene Madonna in paintings, she is also the woman of the still, the woman who stays when others run, who holds the horror in her hands and doesn't look away. And after the last breath, she is there still. They take his body down, lifeless and limp. Can you imagine it? Holding the body of your son, once so full of light and laughter, now cold and broken? This moment, captured in countless works of art as the Pietà, is not just artistic, it is humanity laid bare. Mary didn't understand every detail of the divine plan, but she trusted it, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. After the burial, she doesn't protest. She doesn't rage at the heavens. She retreats into the stillness of mourning, into silence. And that silence is sacred, because in that silence, something was happening. When Jesus died, the world thought it was over. But Mary knew this wasn't the end, not because she had all the answers, but because her entire life had been a rhythm of hope through darkness. And then, resurrection. On the third day, the silence is shattered by angels and by the shock of an empty tomb. He is risen. Can you imagine her joy? From total devastation to infinite wonder in a heartbeat, the one she thought lost had conquered death. The child she once cradled now cradled the universe. Mary's faith is rewarded, not with explanation, but with resurrection. This is crucial. She didn't just witness the pain, she also witnessed the victory. After Jesus' ascension, Mary did not fade into obscurity. She became the quiet heartbeat of the early church. No longer just a mother, now a mentor. We're told in the book of Acts that she was there in the upper room when the Holy Spirit came upon the apostles at Pentecost. She was there when the church was born. Her prayers, her presence, her stories, all became the soil in which the gospel took root. Mary wasn't seeking attention. She was offering foundation. She reminded the apostles that the story wasn't over, that suffering can lead to redemption, that love, real love, isn't loud or showy, but sacrificial and enduring. And that's where many of us need to be reminded today, because when life breaks us, when silence surrounds us, we can look to Mary, not as a distant, unreachable figure, but as a woman who has walked where we walk, who has endured the darkest night, and who never gave up. In the next and final section, we'll explore the mystery of Mary's final days, her assumption, and her ongoing legacy as a mother to millions, not just in heaven, but in the hearts of those who still find strength in her silent, steady faith. What happens to someone after they've carried the Savior, watched him die, and witnessed his resurrection? In most stories, the hero fades once the climax ends. But with Mary, the story continues, quietly, powerfully, eternally. After Jesus ascended into heaven, the apostles were left with the overwhelming task of carrying his message to the world. But they didn't do it alone. Mary was there. We don't get detailed descriptions of her post-crucifixion life in the canonical Gospels, but early Christian tradition and historical writings give us a compelling glimpse. She lived under the care of John the Beloved, just as Jesus had instructed, and she remained close to the heart of the new church, not as a celebrity, but as a source of strength. Imagine the early Christians, persecuted, scattered, doubting. And then imagine sitting down with Mary, listening to her tell the story of Gabriel's visit, of the night Jesus was born, of the little details no one else could know. Mary didn't write a gospel, but her life was one. Her very presence was a gospel of endurance, of trust, of quiet power. She didn't preach from rooftops. She prayed. She encouraged. She reminded the apostles of who Jesus was, not just as the risen Lord, but as the boy she raised. The boy who once fell and scraped his knee. The boy who laughed, who worked with wood, who whispered prayers at night. And through that, Mary became something more than a historical figure. She became a living bridge between heaven and earth. But even her earthly journey had to end. According to ancient Christian tradition, Mary was visited one final time by the angel Gabriel, just as she had been at the beginning. Only this time, the message was different. Her earthly mission was complete. Her time to depart had come. She received a palm branch, a symbol of peace and victory, and her only wish? To see the apostles once more. Miraculously, they came. From far-flung corners of the known world, the men she had helped shape with her love and presence returned. And in one of the most beautiful images in Christian memory, she blessed them one by one. Not as a queen, but as a mother who had given everything, and now was ready to go home. The moment of her death wasn't filled with fear or agony. According to sacred tradition, it was filled with light. Jesus himself is said to have come for her soul, accompanied by angels and the spirits of prophets. And then something even more mysterious. 3 days after her burial, her tomb was opened, and her body was gone. What was left? The linens that had wrapped her. The same way Jesus' tomb had once been found. Empty. This is the foundation of what the church celebrates as the Assumption of Mary, that she was taken into heaven, body and soul, to share fully in the glory of her Son. It's not just about a miracle, it's about a promise. A promise that death does not have the final word. A promise that those who walk in faith, as Mary did, are not abandoned. A promise that heaven is not just for the spiritually elite, but for the faithful, the wounded, the ones who keep saying yes through tears. Since then, Mary has never stopped being a presence in the life of the church. Across centuries, continents, languages, and cultures, people have looked to her, not as a goddess, but as a mother who understands, a mother who listens, a mother who stays. From Lourdes to Fatima, from Guadalupe to Rwanda, visions of Mary have continued to inspire millions. And in every one of them, the message is the same. Return to my Son. Pray. Trust. Do whatever he tells you. Those 5 words she once whispered to servants in Cana have echoed across time as the simplest, most powerful spiritual guidance ever given. Mary's life wasn't perfect in the way we often imagine saints to be. It was filled with real danger, real sorrow, real waiting. But in that, she became something universal, a symbol of holy endurance. And perhaps most importantly, she became an image of what it means to follow Jesus to the very end, and then beyond. Even today, in a world that seems to move faster than ever, Mary calls out, not loudly, but consistently. She speaks to the anxious heart, to the grieving parent, to the confused teenager, to the faithful soul who's running out of strength. Her life tells us, you don't have to be fearless. You just have to be faithful. You don't need to understand everything. You don't need to have power or prestige. You simply need to trust that love is worth the cost. And that's why, 2,000 years later, she still matters. Not just as the mother of Jesus, but as a model for all of us who are trying to walk through a world that often doesn't make sense. She reminds us that saying yes to God doesn't mean comfort, it means purpose, and that even when everything falls apart, hope still lives. So the next time you see a statue of Mary, don't just see the veil and the soft eyes. See the fire beneath, the courage, the pain, the surrender. The woman who gave her whole life to something bigger than herself, and in doing so, became the greatest human, yes, the world has ever known.